Well, first of all, thank you so much, everyone, for coming, especially those who are not part of the Effective Altruism. I feel very honored that you decided to spend this evening with us, with me. So, introducing oneself is a bit of a challenge, so I made it even more challenging by putting a bunch of strange pictures of myself. So, a lot of people who are in animal advocacy, for some reason, have pictures with chicken, so this is why I decided to start with this as well, and I really like chicken. But I'm also a trained chef, and I had the crazy opportunity of working during COVID with all of these weird equipment, which I don't think was really effective. But apart from that, I'm also a fungi enthusiast, and I worked at Libre with one of my colleagues, which is an alternative protein startup here in Barcelona that works with fungi. And before that, I was also a bit of a bored scientist, an exciting scientist, working with genetic modification of rice. And so the whole, I guess, theme of all of these things is I was always interested and inspired to do things related to nutrition, to food, and to make a positive impact. But I'm not a medical professional, engineer, historian, or seer, which is a word I learned today, who is someone who predicts the future, because we are going to talk a little bit about the future of protein, but I'm not sure that I have the right answers. So, that being said, now it's your turn to introduce yourselves. No, just kidding. Okay, let's go to protein. So obviously starting, I asked more or less to do this presentation, but then but what really is protein? So I Googled it. And if you Google protein, this is the results that you see. Okay, so it seems like protein is often associated directly either with fish or eggs or meat. And this is partially probably thanks to the amazing marketing from the American Institute of Meat, which made us believe that this is life, or that meat is incredibly great, and that the red color signifies strength and virility. And we now, a lot of you, myself as well, probably consider that eating meat is normal, natural, necessary, or nice. But is it this way? Thank you. Well, you have this typical image or idea of, okay, humans started as hunter-gatherers. Melanie really wanted me to start the presentation like this. And you can see this man being a bit suspicious of plants and kind of more excited about meat. There is a little bit of debate around this as well, in reality, and if meat really made us humans. But well, we're not going to go into this because it's fair to admit that we have, with the animals, we lived for a long time together, and then things got a bit strange. And so, first of all, with the development of agriculture, started also the domestication of animals. So it all started with the dog, then the sheep, pig, cow, cat, which was an error, and then all the other animals. Okay, so then the agriculture continued to evolve. And there was, little by little, we started intensifying the agriculture, but all with the point of having a steady supply of food, and this is what also allowed the societies to develop the way they are, because there was not, the worry about food continued, and it still continues today, but it was not as, let's say, food became less sporadic and we could control it a little bit. But with the time, things got a bit more and more toxic when it comes to animal exploitation. And this is how we started to really using antibiotics in a very reckless way, and also expanding the factory farming. And where does it leave us today? Well, to the fact that the global meat production is incredibly huge. And if these numbers don't speak a lot to you, they don't to me, but well, and I learned from Pablo that big numbers are very hard to visualize, but we'll continue with them. So these are the numbers of animals killed daily. Wow. And for the fish, they cannot even calculate it because of how much it is. But well, how is it reflected in the consumption then? And well, I'm talking about EU, and sometimes I will talk about the US depending on where the data comes from. The EU consumption seems to kind of stall or not increase as much, but it's still around a little bit over 60 kilograms per year. But you might wonder, and I ask you to take a little moment and think about what you think is the recommended consumption for meat. It's half of it. Wow. No, well, in reality, some countries don't even have a recommended consumption because of the problems I will mention later on. But well, the upper limit really of like countries that have kind of a meat-heavy culture is around not to be more than 60 grams per week, which translates into 31 roughly kilos per year, which is half. And this is the highest amount recommended. But well, why is this a problem really? Thank you for asking. In no particular order, there are quite a lot of problems related to meat. First one is the health impact of meat consumption, and maybe you might have heard that processed meat is considered cancerogenic, so a type 1, so that there is scientific proof of the mechanism and also epidemiological data that shows that consuming processed meat leads to colorectal cancer. When it comes to red meat, there is not enough data, but it's still considered a cancerogen type 2A. So if you look at these advertisements, they did not age very well. But this is not the only health impact of the animal agriculture, because right now, you also might have heard of a possibility of so-called superbugs, which are related to the fact that common infections that have been treated for over a century now with antibiotics might not be able to be treated because bacteria are becoming resistant to the antibiotics. This is related to that depending on the country and the region of the world, but more than 70% of antibiotics are actually used in the production of livestock. And 40% is not even for medical reasons, because what antibiotic use allows is for faster fattening of the animals. And on top of that, well, they lived in these confined spaces, so the possibility of getting a disease is much higher. So this is why the antibiotic use is crazy. On top of that, a lot of disease that we have faced in the last century were also related to animals. And maybe there is still a bit of debate with coronavirus, but what is definitely true is that Ebola, Zika, West Nile fever, and avian influenza are all related to the transmission from animals to humans. It's going to get better later on, don't worry. But well, stick with me. Environmental impact. Around half of the habitable land is dedicated to agriculture. Out of these, almost half, 80% goes to livestock, whether it's space where they're grazing or for the production of crops to feed these animals. Okay, but well, we need to produce food somehow, right? But using animals is an extremely inefficient system. Why? Because just like us, you know that all the food that you eat does not translate into your muscle gains. We need energy for just normal metabolism. But the bigger the animal, the more energy in the end they need for this basic metabolism. So having animals, so feeding animals for them to just live their normal lives, which they actually don't, already consumes a lot of energy. And in the end, even for example, chicken are considered one of the most efficient ones, but still out of 10 calories given, 9 go to waste. And on top of that, chickens, they have been bred to get bigger at an extremely unnatural pace. Why? Because again, we want to feed them food, we want to make it as efficient as possible, but this is extremely unnatural for them, so it leads to disease. And if you look at these pictures, and this is already, even in 1957, these are already breeds of chickens that have been improved. More so, battery cages in reality in Europe are banned, and they have these improved kind of cages. And maybe this area does not speak so much to you, so I wanted to give a more tangible example. A4 has an area of 650. And right now, the requirements for cages in Europe, I believe, is 750. So it's not 2 A4, it's like this. And to help you understand the numbers also of the Avaltas chicken, so there's this guy on the internet, people do crazy things. He decided to represent each factory farm chicken in America with a dot. And so here, these are not all the factory farm chicken. These are just 2 pages that I printed out of 22,895, where each dot is a single chicken. Wow. Living on an A4 piece of paper. I don't know who is saying wow, but thank you. Okay, but well, the funny thing about this is that it actually happened by mistake. So a little reference to Taylor Swift, I don't know if you understand it. But there was this woman in the 1950s that actually kept 50 chicken in a 9 square meter house that she used to produce eggs. And then by mistake, instead of ordering or receiving 50, she received 500. But well, what is she going to do with these 500 chicken? Not going to throw them out. So she was like, okay, I'll try to keep them. In the same house, where she kept 50 chickens, she kept 500. So naturally, some of them died, some survived. But I don't remember, in a 6 or 2 months time, something like that, she sold them. And she realized that actually selling chicken for meat made a lot more economical sense than selling the eggs that she used to do. And so this is how the whole poultry industry supposedly started. But because if you look at right now, chicken is I believe, the most consumed meat. But it didn't used to be like this, finally using this. It was almost at 0, and then it went up, all because of a mistake. So let's make more mistakes and eat more beans. Okay, but well, you probably believe that you cannot get your protein from elsewhere than meat. But I'm about to change this. First of all, what are proteins? Who wants to? I'm looking there because I know that she knows. But well, proteins are chains of amino acids. So you can think of it like letters of the alphabet or maybe Lego bricks. There are 20 of them, 9 of them are essential. The essential ones, we need to get them from food. Then these chains of amino acids are, I don't know what would be the word, become these complex structures like this one. And these are the ones that perform different functions in the body. And contrary to popular belief, proteins are not just for muscle, but they have a lot of other different functions. So for example, hemoglobin, the one that transports oxygen in the blood, is a protein. Enzymes in the digestions are protein. Insulin, which is a hormone, and a bunch of other hormones are also proteins. Antibodies for the immune protection are also proteins. Finally, muscles are proteins, and protein can also be a source of energy. This is why like the ketogenic diets, for example, are very popular. Okay, now that we know the function, let's think about the digestion, because one might think that you eat the protein and this protein then performs the function in the body. But this is not how it happens. And this is why there's also this belief of you eat muscle, you get muscle. But the muscle that you eat does not necessarily go into your muscle. What happens is that in the body, the digestion makes it go from this complex structure back into the chains of amino acids and single amino acids. And then the amino acids are used to build new proteins in your body depending on the necessities that you might have. So you're not necessarily, by eating protein, you're not necessarily building muscle, or you're not necessarily making antibodies. Really, the body is a very complex system, and depending on the needs that you have, will determine which protein is made. So this leads me to what is the amount of protein that an average person needs. Again, a bit of controversy around this, but these daily allowance, daily requirements have been determined by very, let's say them, difficult experiments when actually people were put into these like zip-up suits, and everything that came and everything that went out was calculated. And this way, the nitrogen balance was determined. Why nitrogen balance? Because, well, nitrogen mostly comes from proteins, but well, don't get too hold up with that. But well, this is the fact. The fact is that the proteins, the amount of protein necessary has been studied extensively, and has been proven to be around 0.8 grams per kilogram of weight. Now there is a bit of a debate regarding that if you're really doing a lot of sports or some kind of very intense activity, you might need a little bit more, but it's never more than 2 grams, no matter what you hear from your favorite YouTuber. So what does it leave is that basically for an average person of around 75, I believe, it's going to be around 63 grams. And what we typically eat is a lot more. Why it says here protein per meat? Because basically what they showed here is that this is the typical distribution of a European diet, I believe, where even by completely removing meat and not replacing it with anything, you would still be above your needs in protein. But well, hopefully you also want to remove dairy and eggs. But then you might wonder, okay, but I heard that there's this thing about incomplete proteins. And this is a myth that unfortunately has been going on for already more than 50 years, but people still believe it a little bit. So I'm showing this extremely colorful graph that hopefully convinces you that everything has all the amino acids. They're just in a different proportion. So as long as you don't eat just one thing, you're probably good. And not you're probably, I think you're good. And when I say one thing, is really one kind. because I think probably different varieties of potatoes also might have a different composition of proteins, you know, and I say it because I love potatoes. And I could subside only on potatoes, but I don't, because of this. And again, there is a bit of a myth that you have to complement like beans with rice, because they're complementary proteins. This is also a myth, because the proteins that we consume, again, are broken down into amino acids, and there's a pool of amino acids. And in the worst case scenario, also your body recycles proteins. So it's, I don't know what the scientific data would be for it, but I'm pretty sure that it's very difficult to, by eating different plants or different sources of protein, to come to a moment where there is, because of one amino acid, your body stops functioning. So rest assured. But then you might think, okay, it all sounds good, but can I really just eat plant-based proteins? This was a very difficult slide to make, so I hope you're ready. All these people are vegan. They seem to look okay to me. The Olympic athletes, also the idea here was to show more females, so this guy was too much, so I put myself. Not Olympic athlete, but vegan and doing some sports. So you're good. I hope that this could be the end of the presentation. Maybe it's not. So what if you think that going plant-based is just another trend? Is that what you think? No. Okay. It all started with Greek philosophy. And I really like this because it's vegan. Never tried it, but looked great. So already, I don't know how to pronounce his name in English actually. Pythagoras? Because of the pyramid, was vegetarian or promoted vegetarianism. Obviously, he did not have all the data that you have now, but he believed in reincarnation. So he believed that if you eat an animal, maybe you are eating actually another human being from a different life, so it's better not to eat them. The same ideas, or quite similar, came from Plato, and then from this other guy, and another one. It seems like veganism and bearded guys go together. I don't know if you want to try to guess who they are. I would not have guessed, so... Well, this is Leo Tolstoy, the one that wrote Peace and War, War and Peace. That he believed that if man can subside without eating animals, then eating them is immoral. And Leonardo da Vinci was a genius, so he knew everything. Okay, but now moving on to the OGs of the alternative proteins, which you might have heard of and which you might hate and think that are tasteless: tofu, seitan, and tempeh. They came from also more of a moral need and the influence of Buddhism in Asia, and believing that we should live a life with no harm and no harming other living beings, right? So tofu and seitan actually dates thousands of years ago, and probably came to be by some accidents in the kitchen, and somehow in the past people had better accidents than we have now, so they came up with like new products, and we have just like something unedible. And tempeh is my favorite one. And if this was not entertaining enough, I brought a tempeh necklace. And also some tempeh for you to look at. Because tempeh basically is soy that is fermented by a fungus. And you could easily make it at home, but probably better not to do it. Really leave it to the scientists. So. And well, the story behind this is that I'm a big fan because it's a couple of designers here in Barcelona that thought, okay, to grow tempeh, you need a temperature of around 35 degrees. And our body is 37 degrees. So you're a natural fermenter, or like an incubator for the tempeh. And for the, and for the people who are like, oh, it's hard to find the plant-based alternatives. I carry it on myself. Okay, so well, if you want to look at it closer and you've never seen like raw tempeh, well, because usually it's pasteurized, the one that you get in the supermarket. So maybe you've never seen that it's actually this white fungus around the soybeans. But well, hopefully you know tempeh and seitan, but I could have brought it as well. So well, again, going back to a little bit of the story, this was, so tempeh, I believe, is more from a 19th century and was actually discovered or started to being manufactured in Indonesia. And this is more related to the weather conditions actually there. Because it's interesting that in one part of the world you get tofu, in the other one you get tempeh, even though both of them are made from soy. Well, so these plant-based products, we all know them, but a lot of us are not completely convinced. But we'll change that later. Okay, now traveling to California and the birthplace of hippies, and also some German immigrants that I believe they had a belief system which was called life reform. And similar to the hippie movement and like this counterculture in the 50s, 60s, 70s, they believe that we have to go back from this industrialized way of life and be more connected to nature, to our roots. And so it made sense to also not hurt the animals and be more peaceful. Moving on to, or traveling now to the UK, where the word veganism was born in 1944. And this was the work of this smiling man. Because basically the vegetarian society already existed. And there was, again, this... So let's say, if originally the ideas of vegetarian veganism were related to this no harming of the animals, then the hippies community, the Seventh Adventist Church, the life reform, they did it more for what seems like to be more connection with nature and health reasons. And then the veganism, and so the vegetarian society also promoted more these views of not utilizing animals, let's say, but also they believed that for health reasons it made sense to reduce the consumption of animal-based products. However, according to Donald Watson, being a vegetarian was not enough. And we had to be stricter. And even though he seems like he's smiling from what he wrote here, it seemed like he was not a very nice guy. And he really wanted to push the veganism on everyone, like all of us. No, just kidding. But well, basically what he did, I think that also what I like about this story is how he came with the name veganisms, is because he thought, I wrote the names, he thought of something like dairy ban, vegan, benivore, but they all sounded a bit weird. And so he thought, okay, I'm going to call it vegan because it's the beginning and the end of vegetarianism. Oh. Yes. And interesting enough, the vegan society still exists and now they make supplements. So it makes sense that they promote veganism. So then comes the protein crisis. I don't know if you heard of it, but maybe you've seen that right now it feels like a protein crisis as well. And products with a lot of protein every day on the shelf. Now there is like even a gazpacho with whey protein for some reason. This has been going on for around 70 years, let's say. And it all started, unfortunately, because of a bit of a colonial point of view, as a lot of things in the world, and the Western countries wanting to help the developing world. But, so they looked at a lot of these dying children in Africa specifically, and they misinterpreted that the fact that they were malnourished was related to specifically protein. It was not related to just the fact that the country was underdeveloped or they were not consuming enough calories. No, it was protein. So there was this huge effort into trying to produce more protein. Obviously first, and this actually controversially led also to, for example, development of Nestle, because then Nestle went everywhere and started giving out milk, or other types of weird solutions that never took into account the cultural or culinary traditions of these countries. So well, the typical problems. But what did it lead to is that people started looking into ways to produce protein that would be different from using animals. And in France, they came out with this amazing steak of oil, which is an incorrect name, but well, alternative proteins have always played a bit of a marketing issue. Because initially the idea was oil at that time, so in the 50s, I want to say, was quite cheap and very abundant. And there are some there are some organic compounds that are wasted, but we can use them to grow microorganisms on them. And so this was the initial idea. Let's grow microorganisms on organic waste. However, what happened is that there was no petrol, so it didn't make a lot of sense. But it did not stop there. And I was really excited to find out a CIA document. But because in the USSR, the idea of becoming independent from the rest of the world and not importing grains was also very big. And they also looked into this idea of making what is called single-cell protein. I'll talk a little bit later about it because in reality now it's what we consider fermentation-based protein. But the idea is use any kind of organic waste to grow microorganisms. And microorganisms can be fungi, yeast, or bacteria, or even algae. And why does it make sense? Well, first of all, because you're using some kind of organic matter that usually you would not be using. And on top of that, microorganisms don't have this issue of losing calories, because actually most of the microorganisms can be eaten, which means that the calories that you put in are transformed into almost the same amount of protein. So it's a lot more effective. But well, with the usual problems in the USSR of trying to do things too fast, too bad, everything kind of fell apart. And then also people realized that the amount of protein that was needed was completely wrong, because the initial tests that have been done here were done on rats, or on rat babies specifically, that grow at a completely different pace than humans. So they also need a lot more proteins, which is completely not translated into human research. But then, thankfully to the 2 world wars, we realized, okay, we actually can survive with a lot less. And this is how we came to the actual amounts of protein that are now recommended to be eaten. So the whole obsession with the protein kind of went down. Until we're back to our current days, where, well, this is still a problem. So how do we deal with this? With alternative proteins. And what is the promise of the new generation of alternative proteins that are all the hype? Well, they promise to solve all of the problems that exist with the animal agriculture currently, because they would allow to mitigate climate change, because they will be a lot more efficient, safe, so offer food security, again, because of more efficiency, reduce the antibiotic use, reduce the pandemic risk, restore biodiversity, because the land usage will decrease significantly. And again, going back to the fact that they're a lot more efficient, so anything basically would be more efficient than making animals and eating them. Okay, so these alternative proteins are typically classified into 3 categories, even though now there is a bit of a mix between all of them. But let's stick to the classification, which there are the plant-based, the cultivated, and the fermentation-based ones. So the plant-based are the classics. It all started with Beyond Burger and Impossible, where the idea was, okay, plants and animals, more or less, are made from the same things or the same nutrients. So let's reconstitute animal steak with plants. The idea seemed great, but well, it faced its moment of hype, and then a bit of a disillusion and disappointment, I guess. Some of it does make sense, at least from my point of view, but some of it is also a bit of a bad communication, and also, let's say, targeted campaigns from the animal lobby. And what I mean by that is, for example, if you look at the nutritionals, or some of them, this is a recent paper that compared all of the plant-based alternatives that are available on the UK market. And here the different, sorry, I didn't put nothing super unscientific, but well, you'll have to believe me that these are made different plant alternatives that are made from different, because most of them are made with legumes, but some of them can be made also from nuts, seeds, so different plant-based origins. And these are the meat counterparts that are trying to replace. And so, for example, if you look at the amount of saturated fat, which is known to be extremely detrimental for health, especially cardiovascular health, well, the amount of saturated fat is much higher in meat compared to a majority or a big part of plant-based alternatives. When it comes to fiber, it's the other way around. Fiber is something that typically Western diets lack, and meat has 0 fiber. So even though sometimes or oftentimes these plant-based alternatives are heavily criticized based on the fact that they are ultra-processed, that they have a lot of ingredients, in the end, their composition is better than meat. And knowing that especially red meat and processed meat can be cancerogenic. On top of that, there was even a randomized crossover trial that was sponsored or was paid for by Beyond Burger, or Beyond Meat, so we need to take that into account, but still. They specifically compared grass-fed, best quality available meat with its Beyond alternative. And the type of study, so a randomized crossover trial, is the highest amount or the highest level of evidence that you can have in clinical trials, because each person consumes both, right? And acts as their own control. So first, you're randomly assigned to a group that will start with meat, for example, for, I think it was 6 weeks, then switch to plants. But someone else would do the other way around, start with the plant-based one and go to meat. Meaning that really, that you cannot go say, but maybe they changed something else in their diet. Okay, but it's the same person that you're comparing. So of course, there are some confounding effects in the right, but they're minimized as much as possible compared to some other kind of trials that you might have. And this study found out, also I really like that they named it appetizing plant food. They found out that even over a short period of time, and knowing that, for example, Beyond Burgers have quite a high amount of salt in them, which, again, is a cardiovascular risk. But people, when they cook Beyond, or at least that's what they found in the studies, that when typically meat is cooked, salt is added. So there is not much of a difference in salt quantities in the end. But most importantly, it seems like the compounds that are found in meat are still more detrimental to the ones that are in the plant-based burgers. And basically, again, this cannot be generalized, and this is an important point to take. So this was the specific study that compared Beyond Meat burgers with beef burgers in the specific composition that it had. But it still showed that the cardiovascular markers are much better in the population that consumed plant-based instead of meat. And finally, there's also the classic local hero, not paid to promote them, but you're lucky enough to have access to it here. And their mission is to, well, all of these, I guess, talk about plant-based is trying to convince you that not all plant-based are the same. And of course, you can find extremely high-fat, high-sodium plant-based alternatives that are breaded that probably should not be consumed regularly. But there are also alternatives that have a very short list that have no additives at all when the meat counterpart typically has them, and the one that they have are cancerogenic. Leaving you with that. Okay, the fermentation-based ones. I call them the Renaissance because going back to these ideas of growing single-cell protein, some of the companies survived, and one of them is corn, and another one is Pekilo that maybe you didn't heard about, but it's actually, well, it's based in Finland. These are some of the companies that date back to the 80s or 60s when they put a lot of effort into developing this single-cell protein. But now a lot more companies are looking into. So again, the idea is fungi or bacteria or yeast, which are also fungi, can be cultivated in what is called a bioreactor. Like this. Which is also how beer is produced. I was going to open it, but I'm not thirsty yet. So the idea is we put a bioreactor, which is a liquid, and we add the nutrients. And we can specifically use nutrients that otherwise would actually be wasted. And this is especially true for fungi because they are considered the natural recyclers. And you know, like if you think about where do fungi grow, like any place where there's a little bit of humidity, boom, a fungus. So they're very easy to grow. Obviously, this is not completely true, and there's a lot of R&D that goes into optimizing the growth of microorganisms, but it's still a lot more efficient than growing animals. And I don't know if I wanted to say something else. I know what I wanted to say. So to bring in this, again, a little bit more to reality, I don't know if you know nutritional yeast can also be considered a single-cell protein or a fermentation-based protein because it's just yeast that was cultivated in a liquid with sugar, and then the liquid is removed, and we're stuck with the yeast cells that are then deactivated and have 47 grams of protein per 100 grams. So obviously eating these might not be the best solution, but the idea behind the fermentation-based protein is pretty similar. And again, going back to the example of beer, in beer, the yeast, we typically filter it out, and we're interested in what the yeast metabolism or like lifestyle in this bioreactor has made, which is transformed the hops and what else is used for beer into alcoholic liquid. But in the case of fermentation-based protein, what we're interested in is in the microorganism that grew in this liquid. I hope it makes sense. Okay, finally, the last one, the most unexpected. No. Okay, I really like these comparisons from GFI where they show that to a little bit better understand and make it less futuristic, let's say, is that, okay, what is the basic principles of making cultivated meat is that we need a cell that then we separate and again put in some kind of bioreactor. Bioreactor, again, I think it could be just simplified to like a very big bottle where we control the environment. And why this part is a little bit tricky, especially with animal cells? Well, because if it was easier, then we would have been growing organs all along. But we're still figuring out what are the specific needs of the cells, and it's also very tricky to maintain them alive, to not have them grow in a completely uncontrolled way, and also produce all the necessary nutrients, because again, the cells in our body are used to getting the nutrients already pre-digested through the digestive system. Here, we need to pre-digest these nutrients before giving the nutrients to them. But well, seems very futuristic. The plants seem very easy, but well, here I am killing another plant. And here is Dr. Mark Post already presenting a cultivated burger in 2013. So it's not as futuristic as it might seem, and there are already a few companies that have managed to do it. The scale is still very small. The amount of investment needed is still extremely big, but slowly, little by little, it is happening. And the Meatly company is actually a company that got an approval to sell pet food, cultivated pet food, just this week in the UK. And to finally finish things up, one of the cultivated meat companies in the US wrote a letter to my favorite chickens to notify them that they made cultivated chicken. Okay, conclusions, and then exam. Hopefully this gave you a little bit of a different overview and point of view of how the ideas regarding plant-based and animal-free systems, or animal-free food, let's call them, have evolved. And that the alternatives have been around for a little bit of time. The ideas regarding it have also been around a little bit for some time. Now there's more and more data showing that animal agriculture does not make sense. Alternative proteins do. And luckily, you have the power to make this choice 3 times a day. But I feel a lot of pressure for this part. You might think that your impact is super tiny. Like, this is a small fork. Because other people say, vote with your fork, of course, and your fork is this tiny. But no, it's not this tiny. Big reveal. It's actually huge. Whoa.